Well, Joseph is going to say a few words, but I'll start because he is downstairs and he's coming up. But welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. My name is Amanda Blunt. I'm the director of the Literacy Center. We are located directly next door in the big white house. We provide adult education, English for speakers of other languages, computer training, tutoring, preparation for the U.S. citizenship exam, among other services. We're so happy to have you all here tonight. This is sort of the beginning of what I hope is a many-step process to expand civic literacy in our community. Our hope through tonight's presentation is that you will learn something about local government, that we will have some meaningful discussion about ways that we engage with our local politicians, and at the end we will have an opportunity, if you so choose, to ask some questions directly of some of the local representatives who will be here tonight. So I'm very, very grateful for you all to be here. Just being here is a big part of civic engagement. Just learning about how to engage is important, so I commend you for taking the time. And I do encourage you, if you enjoy tonight's presentation, there will be a link on our Facebook page and our website to the presentation. Feel free to share it out with anyone who wasn't able to make it here tonight. There is food, as you can see, compliments of Willow Tree. We have chicken sandwiches and some snacks. Help yourself anytime, just quietly come up and grab food. The presentations tonight will be presented in English. If you'd like a Spanish copy of the presentation, there is a printout of the presentation in Spanish. I apologize, we don't have other languages, but I will be able to get you copies of that in any language you want. If you would like after the presentation, just let me know. So I'm going to really quickly introduce Joseph Mora. He is the Assistant Director of the Public Library, to say a few words about the resources available here at the library. And then after that, we will welcome our mayor to say some opening remarks. So without further ado, Joseph, just a few words about the library. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I'm happy to see such a great turnout here tonight. My name is Joseph Mora. I am the Assistant Director of the library. We are so happy to be such a strong collaborator with Amanda and the Literacy Center. She and her team are just dynamite. Anything that we know that they're doing, we have a space for them, which also translates as a space for you as well. Our library is your library, essentially. So anytime you are seeking a safe space and a space for information, in this case, voting, information about City Hall, any other buildings in the community, this again is your space. So on our second floor, this is our second floor, we have a reference department, and you can come to the second floor and ask any questions to gather information, again, about voting, about literacy, about great books, great movies, anything and everything that you may want or desire, we hope at the library to be able to offer to you. So again, our second floor has a lot of information, both physical resources as well as human resources as well. And again, I can't say enough about Amanda and her team to be able to support the community tonight, to learn information about voting, elections, and I'm also happy to see that we have esteemed policymakers here tonight who are going to welcome you and talk a little bit too. But again, the library is your resource, so please make sure that you come back and visit us and explore each and every floor that we have available for you. So thank you.
Thank you.
And again, as Joseph mentioned, this library and all public libraries everywhere in every town have information about voting, ways that you can engage with local government. So even if you don't live in Attleboro, your library is a great place to go. So without further ado, I'll introduce Mayor Kathleen DeSimone.
Hello. I am thrilled to be here for several reasons. Number one, I used to work at and teach at the Literacy Center. For several years, I taught adult evening classes, so it was one of my favorite jobs because I had great conversations, met great people, and am still friendly with some of the students I had. So teaching adult ESOL students was one of the best things I've ever done. I'm here also as a huge lover of libraries. Some people think that the center of democracy is found at City Hall or the State House or the Capitol. I assert that the center of our democracy is found here in the public library, in the free exchange of ideas and information. This is where it starts, right? It starts with learning, it starts with education, it starts with community. And then you go to City Hall, the State House, or Washington, D.C., all right? So I'm a huge library lover. I'm here as a former immigration attorney. I've spent several years involved. I represented the United States government immigration in Boston, and then I switched to go on the other side and help people stay in the United States. So I'm pretty familiar with issues on all sides, right, and what it means to come to the United States and why people come. And I thank them for coming. I particularly thank them when they become citizens, because that helps us grow and become better. So I can speak to that as well. I guess I would say I'm here primarily, I'm also here as a resident. I'm here as an American who believes deeply in our democracy, and that we need to continue growing it to keep it thriving. It is under constant attack, so we must defend it. You can defend it primarily by being educated, by being involved, and by, of course, voting. Thank you. And you can leverage your vote. Because when you vote, go home and tell 5 or 10 other people to vote. All right? So that is a great way, right? Don't just vote for yourself. Go out and tell several other people why you voted and that they should go vote, right? Voting is something you got to spread the word. Never take it for granted, because all it takes sometimes is cold temperatures, rain, or a little snow, and people may not get to the polls. All right? Nothing should deter you from voting. And if it does, you can always do mail-in voting. But my primary message, I guess, is to say that when I was teaching at the Literacy Center, one of the things that I did was I took people to City Hall to meet the mayor. I took them to the place where the government lives, because it is a public and free and welcoming building. So I want to extend to each and every one of you, and to your families and friends, I'm there every day. I serve you. Come over and say hello. I'll give you a tour. You need to see the operation. You should be comfortable in there. You should feel welcome. We are there to serve and support. So although a lot of what we do is online, right, a lot of people just interact on their phone, I'm still there every day at my desk doing work. So you all have a free invitation. I extend it to you, Amanda, and your teachers and your students as well. So come on over, say hello. I'll be more than happy to introduce you and take you around, because it matters. All right, because it matters. Because there's actually real people. This democracy doesn't happen. It takes people to make it happen. And I realize that now more than ever. That who's in that office and who makes the choices. Not just because of a political, it doesn't really matter to me if they're a Republican or a Democrat or an unenrolled like myself. It's that people are doing their work meaningfully, thoughtfully, with integrity and character. Because I can disagree with you all day, but if I respect you, you're a person of character, I'm good with disagreement. All right? Unfortunately, there's a contagion going around where people are not who they appear to be, right? And I'm very concerned about, you need to know who you're voting for and what they're about. It takes work, all right? So I'm happy to do the job. I'm happy to serve. This is one of my favorite things I've ever done. And I have served the federal government, the state government, and now the city government. And this is by far my favorite. I'm here for you. Come visit me. Thank you. I have to leave to another civic engagement at 6:30. But come visit me, all right? You all have an open invitation to come say hello. Thank you. Good luck. Register to vote and then show up and vote, okay? Thank you.
All right, so we're going to get into the presentation portion of the evening. So for the next 35 minutes, we're going to have a wonderful presentation by a real expert. Professor Miranda Yaver will be presenting. She is from Wheaton College. She's a political scientist. She's been active in politics since she was a child. She knows all the ins and outs of how this works. We'll let her tell us everything. I'm just going to be in the back learning with you. And I will also walk down the aisle if anybody wants copies of the slides to follow along. I'll pass them out. So just wave your hand if you'd like Spanish or English. I'm happy to hand them out. Thank you, Miranda.
Thank you so much for having me. I am thrilled to be here. As Amanda noted, I have been involved in politics, both partisan and nonpartisan politics. Basically, since I was a kid. This is actually me as a teenager getting involved in local politics. So just to give you some context for how I got to where I am, my grandmother actually She was living in the hills of Montana. She would sneak books off to the pastures while she was looking after the cows, begged her mom to let her finish high school, and ultimately ended up being the personal secretary to then California Governor George Duke Majan. And while raising 5 kids, my mom being the youngest of them, and raised me basically going to homeless shelters, food banks, AIDS clinics, lots of those kinds of things, and then writing letters to Iowa voters as though they weren't getting a million other letters from people telling them about the civic duty of participation. And so my training is as a political scientist in a very nonpartisan capacity, so ignore the stickers on my laptop. I sort of wear multiple hats over the course of the kinds of work that I've done, working on both campaigns and then doing research on American politics. But I'm really excited to talk with you today about what exactly does state and local government do, because a lot of times when we think about politics, we're thinking about the national level. We're thinking about who is the president, what is the national economy doing, who's going to win the next major election cycle. So today we're going to talk about a few things. One of them being what happens in state and local government. Why do local elections matter? Because a lot of times there are many people across the country who will go in to the voting booth thinking about what's at the top of the ballot. And then they look at all these other state and local legislators and maybe even ballot measures that don't have D's and R's next to their names and go, oh my gosh, who are these people? I need to learn more. And then thinking about how we can do more to participate in these elections to help shape policy in ways that we might find desirable. So I wanted to actually have more of an interactive, this is me in my professor mode, I wanted to have somewhat of an interactive discussion. So what are some ways that you might have come into contact with your state or local government? Obviously you're all here today, so that's one thing. But have any of you had other encounters with your local government? Yes.
Yes, I have had encounters with our city government for at least the last 10 years. And it's got to do with the fight that we have had about not getting permits for the field.
Yeah.
And the roller coaster of not getting a straight answer from anyone.
Yeah, getting permits can be a really difficult and time-consuming and very challenging business. Anyone else? Yeah.
School committee meetings.
School committee meetings, bless you for doing that. Obviously no bias whatsoever as an educator, but I'm a big fan of seeing people involved in that. And there are some other, really basic ones. So going to the DMV, everyone's favorite unit of government, in order to get a state ID or a driver's license. It's always the pinnacle of government efficiency. Going to the county board of elections to register to vote, which you can also do at the DMV thanks to something called the Motor Voter Act. Which was passed in the early 1990s. Going to local school districts to enroll your kids in public school. This is a relationship to local government. Taking public transportation. I am one of those weird people who doesn't have a driver's license because I grew up in California and then moved to New York. Don't hold my sports affiliation against me. And then moved to Boston, the Boston area. I actually live just down the street from here. Calling emergency medical services because of a health condition. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I just saw a hand up. Oh, sorry. Visiting public parks, seeking police assistance, going to municipal court to deal with a speeding ticket. Lots and lots of reliance on local public works, such as with snow removal. So there are lots of different ways that we can interact with our state and local government in ways that we might not even be thinking about it as being connected to government. We just think, oh, there's this thing I need to fix. Personal anecdote, I recently had to go to Canada for a conference and I realized my passport was wildly expired, and I was able to call Representative Jake Auchincloss's office. They talked to the State Department. They expedited it for me, and I was able to be on my way to present my research on health politics, which is actually what I do a lot of work on. And so these are, and when you go to the representatives and state government officials' websites, you can see the different ranges of services that they can offer. So again, you know, when we think about politics, and when you think about American politics, I'm an Americanist, so forgive me if I am ignorant about other parts of the world. We're often thinking about what's happening in Washington, D.C., not what's happening in Attleboro, Massachusetts. But there's a lot of important work that's going on here. As our mayor just illustrated, that, you know, we have important libraries, we have important government functions, lots of ways in which we can get involved and feel connected with our communities. So to give you a sense, and so when we think about what is most directly affecting us, generally speaking, it's actually state and local government. So when we think about, so there's sort of this common issue that we look at in American politics, which is that people sometimes misassign blame in voting. We think, oh, this is a problem with what the president's doing, when it might be what the governor's doing. It might be what's going on at the more local level. So just to give you a sense of the scope, the immense scope of state and local government, the total expenditures in 2020 were $2.9 trillion. That is a lot of money. That is a lot of government going on at this level. State and local government budgets are large. They represent a large share of the economy. They make really important decisions about everything from infrastructure to education that really are instrumental in shaping the stability of our economy over time. And we all like a robust economy, whether we're Democrats, Independents, Republicans. We want to have our economy strong, and state and local governments are a key part of that. They also enact lots of laws and regulations defining how economic activity takes place, anything from tax policy to zoning laws that can affect things like access to affordable housing, or just the kinds of use of different types of buildings and housing that's available. And we have basically, and the reason why we end up looking at so much at state and federal and local government, federal, state, and local government, is because in the United States we have this federalist system where we have a lot of division of power among federal, state, and local government. We also have checks and balances across the federal government. So we have some power housed in the executive branch, we have some power housed in the legislative branch, we have some power housed in judicial branches. And this is true at the state level too. We have a state house, we have a governor, we have a state judicial system as well. And so we tend to, this is all just to say that we have this complex separation of power system that on the one hand means that we can enact lots of policies at the state or local level that make sense for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I'm relatively new to Massachusetts, so I'm just catching myself to say Commonwealth and not state. So, you know, that, which is to say that what is best for Massachusetts might not be what's best for Mississippi, or vice versa. What's best for Attleboro might not be best for Boston, a larger city like Boston, or vice versa. And so this allows for a lot of flexibility, but it also means that things are complex because we don't always know who to go to. And so there are trade-offs. So just to give you a sense of, so if you're thinking, okay, this is overwhelming. I know what's going on sort of at the federal government, although things are crazy right now, but I don't know much about state and local government. You are in fine, fine company. Political scientists Jennifer Bachner and Benjamin Ginsberg conducted a survey in 2018 to figure out how much do Americans really know about state and local government. And it might not surprise you to know that the answer is not a whole lot. And this is actually consistent with a lot of, a lot of other political science research about political knowledge of the American voter, where basically when you ask Americans a lot of detailed civics questions, there's mixed levels of understanding about American civics, but we generally are able to find certain cues to help us to figure out how to vote, whether it's party, whether it's endorsements from key local leaders or people who we trust, or a local newspaper, things like that. But that's true at the national level. It's even harder to get people to really grasp the nuances of state and local government, and part of that is because things are so varied from Ohio to New York to Massachusetts to California to Mississippi. So they surveyed 1,500 U.S. adults, which is a pretty good sample size for a survey. It's about what I tend to survey in my own research. Not to prop myself up, but it's a legitimate sample. And most people didn't know if being a state legislator was a full-time job. They didn't know which officials they voted for beyond governor and lieutenant governor and members of the legislature. So there are also local offices for whom we vote, including school boards, as you know, going to the school board committee meetings, and mayoral offices and things like that. But a lot of people just don't know who these elected officials are. Most people don't know whether they have appointed or elected judges. So I teach a lot of law and courts classes, and one of the things that always boggles the minds of my students is, wait, electing judges? That's weird, because Supreme Court justices are appointed for life. Why on earth would we elect judges and justices? And the answer is it's kind of funky. And when you start digging through YouTube to look at judicial ads, it gets really funky really quickly. But it allows but there are some trade-offs there where you can say, well, at least these certain judges have to be sort of in keeping with the politics of the populace. They won't be able to go wildly outside the mainstream. A lot of times people don't know if their state has a constitution. Every state has a constitution. And they didn't know if it was a one-house or two-house legislature. This is just a smattering of things that they were finding. But this is just all to say that we have a lot of work to do in terms of helping people to understand what's going on under the hood, which can help us to be informed voters. Because the goal, whether we're Democrats, Independents, Republicans, third-party members, is to be able to make an informed choice so that the people who we're voting for are going to reflect our interests and our values. But one of the interesting things about these findings is that, okay, so Americans don't know a whole lot about state and local government, and I'll be honest, I focus a lot on the federal government myself, and I've moved to a lot of different states over the course of my career, and I just feel like I'm starting at square one each time. It's like, but most Americans actually trust their local government to handle local problems. There's actually, despite a lack of real familiarity with the nuances of local government, there's a lot of trust in their ability to handle things. And most Americans trust state governments to handle state problems. Whereas there's actually, even though we know relatively a lot about federal government, there's not a whole lot of trust in the federal government. And part of it is that it's really removed and it doesn't necessarily feel like it's reflecting what we value. This is a very testy cord. I'm just gonna wiggle it and see what. There we go. So now we have gotten a sense of the importance of looking under the hood and trying to figure out what's going on in Massachusetts politics, what's going on in my local politics. How do we find who is representing us? So I'm using Attleboro examples because we're here in Attleboro, but this website actually works for wherever you are in Massachusetts. So what you can do is you can go on the Massachusetts government websites, malegislature.gov, find my legislature, and find my legislator, and then all you have to do is put in your address, and it'll display your state senator and state representative. So we have a two-house legislature. There's a state senate and a state house. And so in downtown Attleboro, which is where we are right now, and I live just around the corner, we're in the second Bristol. The legislators are Paul Feeney on the Senate side, James Hawkins on the House side, and we can see that this district, let's see, it's outlined right here. So it can be helpful to then figure out, okay, who are these leaders? What kinds of things are they doing in the legislature? So you can, on their website, see what kind of bills they've been introducing and voting on, and then you can become informed as to, do I want to vote for these people again? So then how do we find our local officials? So those are our state legislative officials. Then you can go on the Attleboro website, which then outlines all of the different elected officials that we have here in Attleboro. So we just heard from the mayor, Catherine DeSimone. She was recently elected in a special election to replace Paul Heroux, who won Bristol County Sheriff to replace Tom Hobson. We also have a city clerk, we elect a city treasurer, a city collector, we elect city councilors at large, we elect a school committee, and then there's a school committee at large. And there's actually going to be an election in November. I believe it's November 7th, that Tuesday, whatever that Tuesday is, to elect a couple of these people. And so then what you can do is you can figure out, okay, who are the people I'm voting for, and who are the people I need to be able to read up on, because I'm seeing that there are all of these signs on people's lawns, and it's like, oh, there's an election, who are these people? And being able to do some research can be really empowering, I think, because that way you can get a feel for the policies and biographical information of these people who are going to have a real influence in our local lives. So what does the mayor do? She gave us a little bit of a sense of the openness of her office. To give you a sense of what the mayor does, the mayor is really involved in the daily management of city government. Generally oversees the budgetary matters, develops the annual operating and capital budgets, so it's very much a managerial role. As we heard, also goes to city council meetings on Wednesday nights, and then really works to communicate directly with the voters. So you heard from the mayor that there's a real interest in having you come to City Hall and see what's going on in local office and get a feel for what the city government can do for you. This can be really valuable. And yeah, oh, I keep touching this.
When there's a special election, how long does that term last?
How long does the term last? Oh, that's a good question. So I know that the mayor term is 2 years. I think that the special election is for councilors. I'm actually need to read up on this.
I was just wondering, for a special election, do they fulfill the end of whatever term you're
Oh, I see. Yes.
Is that how that works?
Yes. Good question. Good question. And, it can be hard to keep track of all these elections because, there are a lot of people, and I'll talk about voter turnout. A lot of us think about voting in presidential elections and maybe the midterms, but then get a little bit overwhelmed when we see the signs coming out again, and it's like, okay, more things to research. But then I also think, okay, more I voted stickers that I can stick on my laptop and get mocked for by my students. So then another elected official, and I'm not going to go through all the elected officials, but if you want to get certain records from the city of Attleboro, understanding the city clerk's office can be really helpful. Not only do they administer the oath of office to elected and appointed officials, but they do things like issue permits, issue marriage licenses, post meetings of all governmental bodies. And so if you're hoping to be able to go to a local meeting, that is their website is going to be helpful in being able to post what's going on where, being able to get copies of birth, death, and marriage records, and response to inquiries from the general public. So if you've got questions, there are ways on the Attleboro website that you can ask them. So thinking about what exactly does all this, so we have all of these elected officials, what exactly is local government doing for us? Well, they draw on a large host of services that can benefit us. So they can announce important issues such as warnings of natural disasters or sort of general weather emergencies. And they provide community electricity. There's a farmers market summer coupon program for seniors, Meals on Wheels program, trash and recycling services, transportation services, my personal favorite, because it helps me get to campus and teach things on American politics. And address reported concerns such as potholes or graffiti. So there are a lot of different broad things, from day-to-day things like electricity and recycling to addressing problems that you're encountering in your community. Now, there are a lot of different policy issues that have been coming up in local communities. So one of them you might have been familiar with is book bans. These are things that are happening in local school districts, local community, local cities, states as well. We're here in a library. I was thinking about wearing my socks that said "Read Banned Books," but I couldn't find them. But these are things that have been proposed and enacted at the state and local level. And that, if you're someone who believes in just being able to access literary materials and, not read a book if you don't want to, then this is something that might be worth paying attention to who you're electing at the state and local level. So I'm a huge baseball fan. Again, please don't hold my sports allegiances against me. So I had to use the example of Amy Madigan in Field of Dreams. I don't know if many of you have seen this. This is a scene from the 1980s where they're talking about book bans, and it's all the more prescient right now. And so from the Diary of Anne Frank to Harry Potter to the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, we're seeing debates in local community meetings and school boards about books that may be present in local school libraries and school curricula. And so a lot of this is coming down to who are we electing on school boards, who are we electing in city councils, who are we electing in the state. These are, as an educator, this is something that is certainly near and dear to my heart. One of the things, there are just a few. New England is not the center, is not at remotely ground zero for these problems. But there are a few book bans, and if you go to the website that I've provided here, you can actually see the list of books that are banned in New England. And Harry Potter was banned or proposed to be banned in one community in Massachusetts for encouraging witchcraft or things like that. Yeah.
Is it possible to have your city or town government put it in their bylaws that bans cannot be brought from public libraries?
I think that would actually that's a really great idea, and I think that those kinds of amendments are possible within local government. And then we would have to probably include certain parameters for like violence, but then recognizing the literary value or sort of balancing the kinds of appropriate language, but also historical or literary significance. I teach constitutional law, and so I teach a lot about obscenity, which I'm sure parents are thrilled about. But we deal with a lot of these kinds of challenges of defining what has the artistic and literary and scientific merit. So one of my favorite authors is William Faulkner. Some of the language would be problematic for certain ages to read, but also I don't think anyone would challenge the literary significance of William Faulkner. And so, but I think your question is something that would definitely be feasible. I think there are probably people in this room who might know better than I. But I think that is something that could be pursued as long as we impose certain understandings of that. Yeah.
with all the other policies in line, how did the banning books get pushed in front so
Yeah.
fast?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, we're dealing with a real culture war. It's become part of the culture war sort of
Reactive?
focus in a number of states. I think that it has gotten, education has been an issue that has been sort of public education and certain educational texts and orientations, such as the way that we talk about racism in America, has been at the center of a lot of policymakers' sort of consternation, I'll go with that word. And so I think that being able to restrict the access to the materials that shed light on things that some politicians have hoped to downplay has been an attractive way to address this. But you're right to think that there are a lot of other issues in the world that we could be battling over. Why is it, Harry Potter?
Yeah, I remember seeing it in the
Yeah.
national news.
Yeah.
We saw it in the national news, and then it was already in our school, like they had the school council was already voting.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wild. And this is not ground zero, Florida and Texas and Missouri and other. I was recently at a conference in St. Louis, and I passed by my old bookstore because I lived there for a year, and they had the Read Banned books signed, but that was the first time I'd seen that in the state that was actively doing this. And so, it is an interesting time to be an educator for sure. But I think that it requires a lot of attention to who we are electing to members of the education community. We can also think about other issues such as policing. We saw a very contentious sheriff's race in 2022 here in Bristol County. And sheriffs can be really important in addressing lots and lots of issues, anything from immigration to handling of Black Lives Matter protests, broader issues of race and policing, gun control, the management of jails, the management of homelessness, and things like that. And so, who we're electing for in those capacities also has a lot of significance, and political scientists have evaluated the important roles of sheriffs, 2,300 of whom were elected in 2020 alone. We can also think about another big local political issue, which is housing. We hear a lot about, I don't know how many of you have heard of the phrase NIMBY, but there is a lot of discussion about when can we, how should we address, not going to touch that. How can we address problems of housing shortages in communities? I lived in LA for a few years, and homelessness is a very big problem in Los Angeles. There are a lot of homeless encampments. But then there are all of these zoning laws that make it really hard to be able to build affordable housing units. Same in New York and San Francisco, and sort of take your pick of big cities in America. And so Massachusetts law gives cities and towns the authority to adopt local ordinances and bylaws to regulate the use of land and buildings and structures, plan with other cities and towns to promote promote various developments in their communities, and to think about the balance of promoting open spaces, but also increasing affordable housing. And so that's another big issue that comes up in local politics as opposed to federal level politics. So then we get to, so we've talked about all these different ways that we can connect with our state and local government. How much do people typically get involved in this? Does anyone know approximately, so I guess you all have this slide, so I'm not going to do my teaching mode of having people guess. So the typical turnout in presidential elections used to be in the 50s. It's inched up to around 60%, sometimes the low 60s. We tend to have a big drop off in the midterms, so it's usually in the 40s. The last couple midterm elections have been in the upper 40s, which has been a big deal. But but it used to hover around 40%, 42%. But then we get into municipal elections, we're talking about 15% voter turnout, which is not a whole lot. The turnout in the Attleboro mayoral special election was about 16.5%. The turnout in the councilor at large election here, 8.4%, which is really, really low as you're observing. And then we get into local school board elections, we're talking in the 5 to 10% range. And again, part of it is that there's probably some fatigue of you've voted in the general election, you've voted in the presidential election, you've voted in the midterms, and now you have all of these, what we refer to as off-year elections that we have to keep an eye on and sort of constantly researching new candidates. And part of it is just that they tend to be lower visibility. We're not getting inundated with ads, with campaign ads in the way that we do every October when we're trying to, watch the World Series, and then we're getting ads for local congressmen and senators and things like that. So, and then we have to think about, well, why is it important that we have higher voter turnout? What do you guys think? Why is having more people voting so important?
More benefits to town and communities.
Yeah, right. If you see someone who's running and they have a platform that is going to benefit you, why wouldn't you want to have your say in that? Yeah, you look like you wanted to be.
Broader representation.
Exactly.
More people from different walks of life voting.
Right. So if you only have maybe the diehard voters voting, that might not be a representative sample of the Attleboro voting community. And so voter turnout is really important, and you took the words right out of my mouth, for representation, more specifically substantive representation. So when political scientists talk about substantive representation, it means that we're electing people who reflect our interests. We're electing people who are going to do things that support the ideas that we value. And so basically what we want to do is we want to get as many of you as possible to be able to participate in these local elections where so few people turn out to vote, so that your voice can be heard. Your voice matters. If there's anything that you take away from this, it's that I hope you know that your vote matters. Especially when we're talking about local turnout being so low, it can come down to just a couple thousand votes, even a couple hundred votes. This is not the situation where we're in the federal government, federal elections, and you generally have a sense how people are going to vote in the state. We don't know how people are going to vote locally because, as Mayor DeSimone noted, sometimes the weather is really bad, and sometimes that's going to affect who is going to show up and who is going to stay home. Yeah. Yes. Sort of in the middle, and then I'll get to you. Yeah.
Who elects the president? Us or the elected?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a loaded question. So I'm happy. Technically, electors. If you were to ask me what my view is on whether we should have popular vote versus electoral vote, I would be happy to share my views as a political scientist. It's the Electoral College is also not wildly popular, so it isn't always consistent with voter preferences. One of the things that we're seeing more states do, and I think this is going to moderate. That's going to influence the answer to your question, is that more states are having pacts to say that we're going to have our electors go with the winner of the popular vote. So it's sort of a hybrid between the electoral vote.
See, if I vote in Massachusetts for a Republican, it doesn't count. Because the electors all go the same way.
So what I would say to that is, we do have a good sense of how electors in Massachusetts are going to go. But what I would say is that it's really important that even if you are feeling like your views are not well represented, in terms of federal elections in Massachusetts, there are all of these state and local elections where people aren't voting as much and where the outcomes are significantly less certain, and there are ballot measures as well that are nonpartisan. And so even if the top of the ticket is not going to your satisfaction, there are all these other issues on the ballot that can be really useful.
It's only the president.
It's only the president that is elected by the electors. So Senate, House, state and gubernatorial, everything else is popular vote. Exactly. Yeah.
Is there anything constitutionally in the way of making voting mandatory? I know our state made a requirement for people to have insurance, and they bag you by affecting your taxes. Is there anything like that that could be done to mandatorily make people vote?
That's a really great question. And it's something that I think about a lot as a political scientist who has worked on campaigns and gets really frustrated when people just decide that they don't want to vote. So it would require a constitutional amendment. If the United States wanted to pass a constitutional amendment, there are very very hurdles. We would need 2/3 of each chamber and then 3/4 of the state legislatures. And one of the challenges, as Mayor DeSimone noted or alluded to, is that democracy is on some shaky ground in some areas right now, and so voting reforms don't. I personally would not be opposed to such a thing, but I think that it would be on shaky ground, just in terms of the sort of the pragmatism aspect. But a constitutional amendment could absolutely be made to render voting mandatory. And so in Australia, for example, which does have mandatory voting, the way it works is you have to show up to the polls. But you don't have to vote for the nominated candidates. You can write in Mickey Mouse. I might write in Bruce Springsteen, my favorite musician. And you'll fulfill your constitutional duty to vote. And then if you don't vote, you suffer a small penalty. And so that is one way that some countries have worked to get higher voter turnout rates, because the United States is not the highest relative in voter turnout relative to other developed countries, and so that is definitely a way that we could.
It just seems that there are many states where it's in the incumbent's best interest to keep voter registration and voting down, and that feels unfair.
Yeah, and we've seen a lot of states enact things like voter ID laws and gerrymandering and things like that. They tend to dilute voters' voices in the system. And the Supreme Court is taking on some of these issues this term. We'll see what happens. I have my suspicions because I teach con law and I listen to the oral arguments because everyone needs a hobby. And so, it is challenging when we see states. It is frustrating when we see states enacting these kinds of things, because I think in a perfect world, we would promote access to voting, and then have candidates that just try to compete for the most votes, and that isn't always what we observe. So then we can think about, well, why do we think voter turnout rates are so low? And there are a few reasons, and some of you probably relate to them. So you in the sort of middle row were saying, maybe my vote doesn't make a real difference. Maybe there's a sense of sort of a lack of empowerment here. Sometimes in a big election, you see a long line, and you're like, I don't have much time off from work. This is going to be really exhausting. I don't want to do this. Getting overwhelmed by information, trying to just, watch a movie on TV with your family, and you're getting bombarded with campaign ads, and you're getting bombarded with campaign texts and emails, and you just sort of want to tune it all out. Maybe you're not inspired by the candidates, or not feeling like you're a stakeholder. Maybe not feeling like what is most important to you is really at stake here. But we're local and state, and there are times when our preferred federal or state candidate doesn't get the nomination. But a lot of times in local elections and ballot measures, with low turnout, really anything can happen. Because again, when only 10% of the city population is showing up to the voting booth, we don't know what that 10% is. We don't know if it's the one that are hardy and have the wherewithal to deal with snow. We don't know if it is. Thank you. Thank you for the timing reminder. And so again, your vote really matters. Oh, it's going to do this 7 times, isn't it? And so your vote really does matter. So just to give you a sense of some close, yeah.
Well, can we trust the voting system? I mean, it is secure.
So are you thinking? So can you give me a sense of what your concern is, and then I'll more specifically, and then I'll try to
We saw
answer.
before the previous election, Trump versus Biden, how Trump accused Biden with all the fraud voters.
Yeah.
So how secure is this?
So that's a good question. And political scientists have really worked hard to answer the question of, there's all these accusations of voter fraud, which have been used to justify voter ID laws and things like that. How much of this is actually going on? How trustworthy is our electoral system? And so there are some political scientists and law professors at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles, and they looked at about 900 million votes cast between 2000 and 2014. So I think it was 880 million, so basically 900 million. And does anyone want to take a guess as to how many credible instances of voter fraud they found?
Less than 1%.
Less than 1%, okay. Anyone else want to take a guess?
None.
Almost. It was
Single digits.
It was double digits. It was 35 incredible instances of voter fraud out of 900 million cast over the course of 14 years. So this is just all to say that there are going to be isolated incidents. We just can't control that, but it's not a systemic issue. And so if you're thinking I will only be able to trust it if it's 100% perfect, I can't make that guarantee. But what I can say is that the broader concern about systemic voter fraud that would imperil the security of our elections has been pretty readily disproven in a number of political science and legal studies, sort of showing that in a given election you might have a dozen across the country or something to that effect. So hopefully that answers your question. So just to give you a sense of some close elections in the United States, and I'm going to wrap up so that we can just have more of a conversation, but I've really enjoyed all of your participation and questions. So to give you a reminder of the 2000 election, Vice President Al Gore trailed then Texas Governor George W. Bush by 537 votes in the state of Florida, which determined which was the state that everything was riding on. And then it went to the Supreme Court in a case called Bush versus Gore. And the Supreme Court stopped the Florida recount. And that ended up resulting in President Bush, when George W. Bush ascending to the presidency. 537 votes in a state as large as Florida is not very many. In 2008, Al Franken beat Norm Coleman by 225 votes out of nearly 3 million cast. Initially, he was down by a couple hundred votes, and then that triggered an automatic recount, and then he won by 225. So again, really close elections. In the House, Lauren Boebert secured re-election by a margin of 554 votes out of 327,000 votes counted. Her challenger from 2022 is running again in 2024. His name is Adam Frisch. Washington Governor Christine Gregoire retained her governorship by a margin of 129 votes in the state of Washington in 2004. And then when we get to ballot measures, which are, a little complex because they don't have party labels attached to them, and sometimes you're thinking, so I'm from California, which has a lot of direct democracy. So the first time I voted for president, I also had to help decide whether farm animals should roam freely. And I have nothing against them. I occasionally will have a steak, but I think that they are entitled to their free will. But in Massachusetts, some of the elections were not in ballot measures in 2022. A lot of them were not blowouts. So taxing millionaires in question 1 in Massachusetts was just 52-48. Arizona's voter ID law failed by just 18,000 votes. It was essentially 50-50. Arizona's issue 3, which had to do with religious freedom, failed by just 7,000 votes. And Arizona is a pretty populous state. So again, these outcomes are not a foregone conclusion. So then how do we, yeah,
52-48.
yeah.
You
That-
talk about votes?
No, 52% to 48%.
Oh.
Yes.
Okay.
It's not 50-50, but it's still pretty close. And so when we think about ballot measures, we're not, in a lot of House races, people are uncontested, and so you'll see people winning with 80% of the vote. Here, you might see something win with 51% of the vote or 52% of the vote, which just should highlight that your participation really does make a
With
difference.
the presidential one,
Mm-hmm.
they took the whole electoral college, which is 500 votes.
They took the.
That's what made the difference.
Well, this was in 2022, so the president wasn't on the ballot.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So how do we find our local election information? We can go to the Massachusetts Secretary of State website, and all you have to do is enter your street address, and then you'll find your ward and precinct number, your voting location, your city or town clerk location, and email address. So the Board of Elections here is at 77 Park Street in Attleboro. Easy walk from here, and then you can get your list of local elected officials. So there are a lot of different ways that so voting is a central way that we can participate in local politics, but it's just one of many ways. So you can write to your local elected officials about issues of interest to you. I started doing this when I was 9 years old, actually, and I probably didn't have the most eloquent analysis. Basically, and I didn't know the proper level of government to which to write. So I was living in California, and there were all these trees that were cut down along the highway, and I felt that protecting the environment was important, and so I wrote a letter to the governor. Pete Wilson at the time, and I tried to explain to him that trees are good for the environment and he shouldn't do this anymore. And if he had any further questions, he should feel absolutely free to call me, give me a call. And then I just mailed it off and didn't hear anything back. But a lot of times, when you are not 9 years old and you have a particular issue, you might very well hear back. You can attend city meetings. You can register other people to vote. So if you have friends in your community who are not registered, you can add another voter to your community. You can volunteer for a local campaign. It's a lot of fun, and you get buttons and stickers, and you get to really know your community well, and you get to talk with people about things that are of interest to them. And you can serve as a poll worker. We need good poll workers. We need more poll workers. I provided an election protection hotline. So basically, if you ever run into voting issues, you can call 866-OUR-VOTE, and then I provided the translations, the numbers that are in translation as well. So in order to, so I also don't want to have you leave without knowing how to just register to vote, because I've told you how you can vote. But if you're not registered to vote, you can download a voter registration form from the Secretary of State website from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. But you can also contact the election office to request a mail-in form. You can vote. You can register at the Attleboro Public Library, at the election office, at the DMV, or by mail. So there are lots of different ways that you can register to vote, and I would just really encourage you to do so and to think about different ways to get involved in your community. But it's been so much fun talking with you, and if you have any other questions, I'm here to try my best to answer them. Yeah.
Where would you find, or do you have a website to find who is running? Like, I can't find certain people. I mean, if they didn't come out to the house, or we don't have a pamphlet,
Yeah.
not on Facebook, I can't figure out.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And I wish that there were more transparency as to what is on the ballot. What you can usually do is find a sample ballot online. And so, and if there are
So it
local.
gives you the name, but it doesn't, you don't know about them.
Yeah, so maybe if there are local elected officials in the room, maybe they might be able to give more information, because I've struggled with this as well, because when I was in California, we would get a big information guide that would give us the pro and con arguments for every ballot measure and a bio for everyone, and I haven't gotten as much of that in Massachusetts.
I would say there's two resources that we've also directed our students to.
Mhm.
And sometimes they're helpful and sometimes they're not, but there's one that's the League of Women Voters. This is a bipartisan nonprofit that really works on expanding voter access and transparency. If you go to vote411.org, they often have some information if information is available. Another is rockthevote.org. They often have links, and so I'd be happy to write that down for anyone who is interested as well. Sorry to interrupt.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm new to Massachusetts, so.
I would say we'll take another couple questions from Miranda, and then we have a quick review and activity to do together before we close up today.
Yeah.
So going back to the question of what it was talking about, to get a permit to get a soccer field, which is really recreational for our community. Why is it so hard to get a permit, or what it needs to be done to get a permit with our authorities?
Yeah, so permits are not my area of expertise. I have not had to do this myself, but I know that it can be a process. What I might recommend is maybe writing to someone in the local government and seeing if there's a way to expedite things. Because sometimes all it takes is just asking a couple of questions and saying, this is what we're trying to do. Can you help me get this done more quickly?
Back in the days, that wasn't a problem. Because I used to have a permit all the time for the fields. No problem, but now it became a problem, so I would like to understand why that became a problem with us.
Yeah, it's a really good segue because we're going to talk about permits in the next part of this activity. So Walter has keyed us in that permitting is something we wanted to talk a little bit more about as well. So we can hold that and talk in about 10 minutes more about that, because there is a really big question. And I think there's lots of layers to the answer to that question. One is processes and the other is politics. So, I think we'll talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Just a question about my rights at a government meeting. I've been shut down. And
sorry to hear
it
that.
feels wrong to me that as a person that took the time out of my day to show up to these meetings, that I should be heard.
Yeah.
And I don't understand how my public officials get to shut me down.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is that these are supposed to be meetings that are open to the public.
That is what I understand, too.
Yeah, so I'm not sure, and gosh, I'm just trying to figure out. Sorry, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that that's been your experience.
Is there something specific I can refer to say you don't have the right to do that?
Let's see. I'll give you my card and I'll look into this. How's that?
That'd be
Okay,
awesome.
and I can say, I think every town has its own rules, and I don't know where those are posted. which is probably the question you're asking. I live in Rhode Island, and I know our town just changed the rule about how long people are allowed to talk, because there was an issue with like grandstanding going on and people going on for hours at city council meetings. So they changed the rule. The council voted on a rule for how long people could engage individually at the podium, as a mechanism to allow people time to speak, but recognize that there were limits.
And we're only ask questions they don't like.
Right, exactly, of course. And so without having an opinion about it, I'll say I think that's part of the mechanism. So my understanding is there are rules, and likely those are somewhere. So you probably ask the city council, you could ask someone at the city hall, what are the rules for engagement with city council meetings, for instance, or school board hearings, or, and there may not be written rules, in which case you get into sort of arbitrary enforcement
Right.
of things until a rule is made.
Right.
Thank you.
That's good.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Yeah, that sounds right to me. Great. Well,
Great.
thank you so much for.
Let's have a round of applause for Miranda. The event is not yet over, so we have another couple minutes, and I want to do a quick activity with you all while you're here to see if you've learned anything tonight. But also while we have Miranda here to help us answer some questions, we'll have her help us with this. So this event tonight was brought together by a committee of people who have all, like probably everyone in this room, experienced challenges with interacting with their local government. That is how this came to be. I am currently digging a very big hole in my backyard to build an addition, and I have had a lot of challenging interactions with my local government. And there are lots of different times in your life that you will have to interact, either whether that's for immigration, whether it's for buildings, whether it's for solving disputes, trying to get a marriage certificate, whatever it is, you'll have to interact with the government. So I have 3 different scenarios that are true stories that are actually happening right now. And I've printed them out. I'm going to ask you all to review one of them each. So I'll just hand them out randomly. Take a quick look, they're just a couple paragraphs, and then we're going to ask a few people to give their responses to the scenario that you read. So do me a favor, and if you don't mind, if you would like a case study in English, raise your hand, and I'll give it to you. And everyone else, if you're not raising your hand, you're getting it in Spanish. Okay.
Excellent. Yeah, there we go. No left.
All right. We have 3 different scenarios. I'm going to do them just by group so that if you would like to, you could chat with the people around you. So let's see. Oh, you put your hands down, now it's confusing. Yeah. brief overview of what it says. Yeah?
Kids don't have AC yet, will it?
Okay, yes, so, for the purposes of projecting, I will sort of give the quick scenario, but, so, for the group that has scenario 1, this is a question about HVAC, which is air conditioning and heat, for the elementary school. And there's a problem with the local, elementary school's heat and air conditioning, and, it repeatedly has not been approved, is that what your scenario says, by the council for funding, so there continues to be an air conditioning deficit, meaning on hot days, the kids have to go home because there's no air conditioning. So what was the question at the bottom of your scenario?
Which entities, people, should a person go to in order to lobby for funding to get central air system in place at the
Yeah, so you're a parent, your kids go to a school that has no air conditioning. What do you do? Like, how do you get involved? How do you solve this problem? Who has an idea from the group that read number 1? There's no wrong answers. You're not expected to know necessarily what to do. This is where we're learning. Yeah?
Definitely the school committee.
Sorry?
The school committee.
You go to the school committee?
Go to mayor.
They're like above the principal.
Go to the school committee because they're above the principal. Go to the mayor?
Superintendent.
The mayor is responsible for the budget.
The mayor's responsible for the budget.
Try them all.
Yeah.
Call them all.
Do them all. All of the above. Write a letter, everybody gets it.
Exactly, scream, right, scream.
Scream. I think screaming is always my reaction too. Okay, let's ask the expert. Miranda, what would you do?
I would do all of the above because, you know, things can fall through. You don't want things to fall through the cracks, but sometimes when people have a lot on their plate, it can just be really helpful to make sure that you're getting through to as many people as possible in hopes that at least one of them is going to say, okay, this is a problem, we need to fix it.
Great.
Who's
Wonderful.
the decision maker?
I would say probably
mayor,
if the mayor is in charge of the budget, but also the school board has a lot of say over their resources, so it would probably be some sort of a joint responsibility.
I would add too, I would probably include the press in this one.
Yes.
So local officials are good, but this is a community-wide problem that's affecting lots of people in the community. Yes.
If I could, actually, I think I was on the council in the 90s when this first began.
Everyone throw a tomato.
The reality is you want to lobby every party involved.
Yeah.
But oftentimes the order in which you approach things dictates how effective you're going to be. You first want to go to the school committee, because the school committee is the one that's going to have direct jurisdiction over all the buildings and anything related to education. They're going to then go to the mayor, because the mayor is the only one who can advocate for spending money. She's going to send some sort of communication to the city council saying, we want to spend X amount of dollars to do X, Y, and Z. Then you're going to lobby the city council to say, hey, we want you to vote yes for what the mayor has asked you to do. Because only the mayor can ask the council for money, and only the council can spend money. That's where people get confused. That technically, you know, mayor doesn't have the ability to spend anything. Only the city council has the jurisdiction to spend money. Sorry for the long answer.
No, that's great. I'm so glad that we have you here. Thank you. Yeah, Chris.
That's not quite what happened.
Is that like a period at the end of the sentence?
Probably, John is most likely correct.
Yes.
But what ended up happening was that I had called sent an email to the school committee saying what's going to go happening with this because these kids don't have AC. And it was immediately turfed to the council. And so I said, okay, so I went from there. And then I presented it to the council. And it's something about everything that John knows, he knows the history as well. And that's exactly what I presented. At that point, I found out that the money would have to come from the capital improvement budget. And they didn't have the money at that point. And so I said, okay, well, how do you get the money to do that? And I think at that point, the mayor has to be on board with that.
Yeah, the mayor would have had the request.
So I went to the mayor, I emailed him, and at that point, I got the same answer, well, let's get it up at this point, because they have the capital. So
been appropriated that in, after the roofs were all replaced on most of the schools this summer, next year in 2024, 8 years later, they're going to have central air put in.
I think that's a really, really great example. So in case you couldn't figure out, Chris is on the committee that put on this event and he designed that case study. So thank you, Chris. And thank you for being so involved locally and thank you, sir, for your service as well on the council. I think this is a great example of how something that feels completely out of our control, slowly over time being pushed forward by citizens and community members became in our control, and that's a really fantastic example of that. I had mentioned a second ago, I would also involve the press, and the reason for that is when it's a community-wide issue involving the press, the newspaper, and when I say press, I'm really talking about formal press like TV and newspapers and magazines and
Sun Chronicle.
yes, not necessarily social media, which I think is helpful in some regards and hurtful in others, but I would say including that so that other people become informed about the issue and you can garner support for your cause is helpful as well. All right, so moving on to scenario 2. Who had scenario 2? Yes, can you just give us a recap of what that was?
Your abutting neighbor's son started a scrap business that is now, the product thereof is now spilling onto your property.
Yes, okay, so I own a property, I don't have a fence because I'm never had one, and now my neighbor's son is living with them and they're starting a scrap metal business in their backyard, and suddenly my backyard is becoming full of metal and garbage and other things I don't want in my backyard. But when I go over to my neighbor's house and I say, hey, I would really like it if you would get everything off of my yard because, you know, this is my property and also it's dangerous and there's all this stuff on my yard, they just get extremely angry with me. Yes, screaming, cursing, all of that, and it becomes a non-workable situation. The question is, what do you do? It is the local government's job to work with the citizens, whether they agree with each other or not. So the question would be, from the group who read that scenario, what would you do?
Go to the zoning board to start with, because they may not even be able to have that scrap metal business in the backyard, and that would initially wipe out the whole problem.
All right, so go to the zoning board and see if perhaps they could give them a slap on the wrist and say you're not allowed to have this business to begin with. What else might you do? Anyone else? Well, this person in this scenario decided they might build a fence. So you cannot, turns out, just build a fence, especially if it's over a certain height. So the next step would also be to go to the permitting and zoning and building department, depending on what it's called in your town, and find out about the permits you need to install a fence. Because once you have a fence, in theory, they really have to put a lot of effort into getting that metal over the fence. In order to have a fence, you need to know where your property lines are. So to find out where your property lines are, you have to go to the surveyor. Some are private, some cities have them. It just depends on where you live. But the building and zoning department or building and permits department would be able to guide you in that matter. Yeah?
In Taunton, there's a place to get your plot map. Could you use that in lieu of a surveyor?
In some towns. So some towns allow you to use what's called a plat map, which will show where your boundaries of your property are. It depends often whether or not, it's my understanding, whether or not the plat map, when it was drawn. So I live in a town in Rhode Island. Our plat map, which I had to go find out about when I was building my addition, was drawn in 1862. So they have not updated it since then, and therefore everyone has to get a survey if you want to do anything. But some cities and towns have more up-to-date plat maps, or they'll even have surveys. Sometimes if you purchase your house, you can ask, has a survey been done of my property? It depends, again, on the town. Rhode Island tends to be a little bit more loosey-goosey about their surveys, but that's not a surprise. Those are all great suggestions. Another suggestion that came up when we were talking about this case study was going to the police department and saying, I'm having a dispute with my neighbor. Could you give us some direction? I think that there's sort of a maybe that could be helpful, or maybe they would say go down to City Hall, but they might be able to at least direct you in the right place. All right, so we have one more scenario. Who had scenario 3? Yes.
There is a very casual adult soccer league
And they're, in the past, they always had a permit to play on the city's school fields. Year after year, they tried to get a permit and they were denied for a variety of reasons. And so they just want to know, what can we do?
Yes, so I'll reiterate that just so it's a little, so everyone in the back can hear me in this beautiful but echoey room. A local soccer league, informal soccer league, adult league, has been playing on local fields that are owned by the city for many years, and then suddenly one day they are denied permits for those fields. They're given one reason, overuse of the field. The next year when they apply, they're told that the high school has the permits this year. The next year they apply, they're told there's a drought, so they can't use the field. Every year it seems like there's a different reason they can't have this permit. Until years go by, many years go by, where this league is not being allowed to use these fields. They go to the recreation department, but they just keep hitting a wall because the person who gives the permit is just saying no and has all these reasons. The last piece of this case study is that there's a belief that this might be a discrimination situation. This particular league that in real life is a group of Hispanic people. They may believe that they're being discriminated against at the city level. And so this becomes a question of, we've done all the right things, we've gone through all of the channels, we keep being told no, and we feel like we don't have control. So I put that out to you, and I'll ask Miranda as well. What do you do if you think you've gone to City Hall, you've asked the questions, you're just told no? What would the next steps be? And then I'll tell you what we discussed as a group when we talked about this.
I would try going to the schools to ask, could we share this field with you once a week? And then if they agree, try again at City Hall.
Yeah, that actually is exactly what came up in our group. We thought, well, if City Hall keeps saying no, why don't you go to the people who supposedly hold the permit and see if an agreement could be worked out? Yep, great suggestion. Any other ideas?
The mayor.
Go to the mayor. Absolutely. I think that is, again, one of those, like, go to the top, right? Just go talk to the person who is the boss of the people saying no. Absolutely.
Well, you said that the city owns the field.
Yes.
So that means, so the mayor can have a say as to whether or not, yeah, they're free to use it. I'm the mayor, and so if I say they can use it.
Yes.
Yeah.
One would hope.
Yeah.
One would hope that the mayor would have some influence there. Any other suggestions from you, Miranda?
Would city council be people who would be worth raising these concerns about discrimination and maybe combating this issue in the community?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that bringing up any claim of discrimination or concern of discrimination, I think could be brought to city council, to the mayor. Again, it could be sort of all of the above, but making it very loud and out loud so that folks know.
All right, so let me give you a rundown of how this has happened. So in 1990 something, we had an issue at Willett, right behind here, where a police officer was riding around the field and found somebody sleeping in their car who was drunk, but he wasn't driving, he was sleeping. He proceeded to grab that, and there was a game going on at the time, right? He proceeded to grab that gentleman and arrest him. So the people on the field reacted and told the cop, hey, what are you arresting him for? He's not doing anything. And the police officer got on the horn and said, I have a riot. So police from here, from Norton, from Foxborough, even sharpshooters and helicopters were with it, right, over somebody who was damaging the community with his actions, right? So because of that, we have had that over our heads since then. It's been over 30 years now since that happened, and we still hear the same thing from our city officials. Now, you would think that if I approach a city council person, right, and talk to them about this, I talked to several, right? Not once did I hear an outrage, because you are denying permission for the people to have a community on the field, right? Not once did I hear outrage about they are denying you permission. Why? Never once. I only heard, oh, you should go see this person, or you should try this, or you should try that. Nobody really got involved, right? I went to the mayor at that time, it was Kevin Dumas, and he was very nice, he called me to his office, he did a little bit. Then I saw Paul Baru after that. He gave me 15 minutes of his precious time, and the whole time he was pacing back and forth. And I remember years ago somebody told me that if you go see somebody in the city and you don't have a group behind you, they will not listen. And that was Paul Baru. Okay? Recently, the new mayor helped us out getting a little something again for our community. But this is the problem. The problem is that it's not just a soccer field for men. It's community, what they're denying, right? The fact that women and children go to that field not to watch the game, not to play soccer, for community, right? And that's been taken away. So we are fighting as much as we can to get this, and we're seeing a little daylight. Maybe the next time we all meet, we need to meet again, right? I have better news. But at this time, this is where I have to report.
Good luck.
Yeah, and
Thanks.
I thank you so much, and I will say that this initial situation that Walter is talking about is part of the reason we have this event tonight, because it really stemmed us starting to think about how do we talk more about accessing local government and the problems that people come up against. So I thank you, Walter, for continuing to push this forward. And I also will say that in our committee, when we talked about that case study, we also talked about organizations like the ACLU and other organizations that could be brought in and be involved as mediators in these sorts of situations. That's the American Civil Liberties Union. They sometimes take cases where they believe discrimination is being made. Something else that we talked about, and I think this comes to your point earlier in the evening about what are the rules about how I can talk or address my city council, or what are the rules about who gets a permit and who doesn't get a permit. Sometimes rules are written down and sometimes rules are not written down. And I think one of the things we can do, whether we can vote or not as engaged citizens, is press our city council and press our politicians to write the rules down and make them really clear. Because when things are not written down, that means that it becomes political and it can be interpreted by whoever is sitting in the seat behind the desk. What we can say is, where is this rule written down so that I can reference it? If this rule isn't written down, what is the process to getting a rule written down so that we all can be on the same page and be transparent about it? A lot of this is not really fun activity. Like, none of this is actually super fun. But I would say at the end, if you get what you're trying to achieve, it's really rewarding. And for the most part, the way our democracy is set up, people behind you don't have to do it again for the most part. Not always, but you're paving a path for everybody else. So I will say I hope these three scenarios gave us some things to think about the different ways that we can interact with our local government. And I just want to make sure that Miranda's had an opportunity to answer any of your questions as well. I know we do have some representatives here. I'm not sure if the senator is still here. I don't see. Oh, wonderful. So we do have State Senator Feeney here tonight as well. And I wanted to give him a moment to speak as well about his role in the state, because we didn't cover a ton of state politics, but we did skirt some of it. And then give you all an opportunity to ask any final questions you have. So, Senator Feeney, thank you, and thanks for your patience while we went through those.
Thank you. All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. This is awesome. I apologize, I came in a little bit late. I was sitting in traffic coming down here, which is something, if people want to yell about transportation, I'm the person to yell at. But I did listen to you, Professor, and to your remarks, because I was able to stream it from AACS online as I was coming in. Of course, I did so safely, and I just went listen-only mode. But I appreciate your perspective. And one of the things, actually, that was brought up is how you can find out who your state legislators are. And you go to that long state Secretary of the Commonwealth website, and you put in, where you live, and you can see State Senator Feeney represents you in the Bristol and Norfolk State Senate District, Representative Hawkins or Representative Scanlon, depending on where you live in Attleboro, representing you in the House. But you can actually shorten that link. And if you're from Massachusetts, you'll appreciate this. If you just put in, where do I vote MA? Or as I like to say, where do I vote Ma? wheredoivotema.com, you can actually get that same information. So just think about, where do I vote, Ma? And you can find out your elected information. So one of the things that I love about the job that I have is not only the fact that I get to work on some incredible issues and engage with people in the community, represent the communities in my district, but that I have the chance to come out, thanks to people like Amanda and the Literacy Center and Deb for getting me here, to kind of demystify and engage people in the political and legislative, from my perspective, process. That is incredibly important, and you're all talking about these issues tonight for a reason. Number one, elections matter. I think that's been said a couple of times tonight. But engagement matters after the election as well. Keeping us accountable, keeping us, making sure that we're representing not only your values of the district that we represent, but that we're available, we're accessible. That is key to having government that works. We're going through these scenarios tonight. Democracy is certainly messy, but it is the best system of government ever devised. There are issues, there are roadblocks, there are things that we're all trying to figure out. But at the base root of that, you should expect your elected officials, whether they're in municipal government, state government, or federal government, to be available and accessible. So how do we do that? First of all, what, a few minutes, and then we'll go, okay. So maybe I can just kind of give a little bit of a base background. Many of you know this already. For those of you that don't, the state legislative system here in Massachusetts is different than most. As you know from covering many other states, we are actually a full-time legislature here in Massachusetts. We were constituted basically like a mini Congress. When you think about our federal constitution and how Congress was put together, a lot of that was based on what Massachusetts did in the early years, right? We have the oldest constitution, I believe, maybe second by a couple of years, in the United States of America. Our system of government in the state legislature, we have, it's bicameral, meaning that there is a House and there is a Senate. Anybody have any idea how many state representatives there are in Massachusetts? Any idea? 160. So there's 160 equally sized, within a few votes, or a few people, districts, House districts in Massachusetts. Senators, we know how many senators there are? 40. So there is 40, again, basically equally sized Senate districts. I represent what they call the Bristol and Norfolk district, which if you're from Attleboro, as long as you live in Attleboro, you're in that district. But I also have the towns of Canton, Sharon, Foxborough, Mansfield, Norton, and North Attleboro as well. Our districts are fairly large, 7 communities. I have about 180,000 constituents. So when you think about that, every time that I go up to represent you all, I'm representing 6 other unique communities, 175 to 880,000 other frames of reference. So my job as a state legislator is to do my best to lead with my values, as I was elected to do, but it's also to represent. It's not a direct democracy. So what I try and do is to meet with as many constituents as possible, hear from as many constituents as possible, kind of try and get a sense of where my district is. Of course, I bring to the job my own frame of reference and my own values, and it's a balancing game. It's not, there's an art to it, right? We talk about political science, and I want to get into that in a second, but there is an art to legislating. It's not always easy, but as long as I can sleep at night knowing that I'm doing my best to represent the people that elected me, then that's all I can do. I will say that what pains me is that not enough citizens know that we're even there to help. So there are a few things that I do in my job that I would say are kind of the key components of being a state senator in Massachusetts. Number one, constituent services, right? We heard earlier, reaching out to Congressman Auchincloss on the federal level for passport help. Traditionally, I'll get calls where somebody will say, I'm trying to get my unemployment check this week. It's the first time I've lost my job. I just cannot figure this out, and I'm not getting a call back. What can I do? People call me, and they often say, I didn't even realize they could pick up the phone and call you. Call my office. My staff, Bill Titus, is my district director. He does all our constituent casework as our point of contact. I tell people we are professional agitators. We will shake the trees until we get you an answer. We're good at that. Can't always get a resolution, but we'll work like heck to advocate for you. So the constituent affairs is big with us, making sure that we're taking care of those issues that people need us for. They call us, like I said, on unemployment, on housing issues, transportation issues. We get calls on passports, and then we work with our federal partners as well to help with that. There are all sorts of things people reach out to us for, immigration issues, education issues, all sorts of stuff that people reach out, we help. The second thing, and probably what most of you would attach to the job of a state senator, we're legislators. So we consider bills, we draft bills, we debate bills, and sometimes we pass them, sometimes we vote against them. But ultimately, everything that happens here in Massachusetts that is a Massachusetts general law goes through the Massachusetts legislature. The governor has a piece of that, certainly, but it starts in the legislature. So we will draft a bill, it'll go through a process. We'll either adopt a bill or send it back. It doesn't pass. Once it is passed, it goes to the governor for her approbation, and she will either sign off on that bill or send it back to us and say, this is a terrible idea, figure it out. Which does happen sometimes. But quickly on that, so that you know kind of the base of that piece of it, that legislative component that's so important. And I should mention that State Representative Hawkins, I think, was going to be here. He was actually voting this evening. As I was leaving, he was still in taking votes in Boston, so he was unable to get down here. But that piece of what we do takes up a lot of our time. Anybody have any idea, just throw out numbers, how many bills were filed this year in the Massachusetts legislature? Ballpark.
50. 500.
550. 7,000. No way. 7,000 bills.
Wow.
Among 200 legislators. We have a lot of ideas. But those ideas oftentimes are generated from people in our district. I'll do office hours. We have office hours this Friday, correct, in our district. Oftentimes somebody will show up and they'll say, all right, Feeney, I got this great idea. Here's what I want to do. And usually takes some time to kind of vet it and to get through it and figure out how it would pass legal muster. And so we work on it. Sometimes it takes years to get them done. But 7,000 bills. And you know what's great about Massachusetts? Every single one of those bills, by our Constitution, has to have a public hearing. Meaning that the public can weigh in on any of those bills when they're brought up and considered by a committee. So the bills get drafted, they go to a committee that works on those bills. For me, I'm the chairman of financial services, meaning every bank, insurance bill, wealth management, all that comes through my committee. Those bills, we have a public hearing, public weighs in, we decide as a committee what bills are going to advance, which ones we're going to send back for further study. Once those bills hit the floor, then it has a whole other process where we get up and we debate. As senators, we always have the bad rap of talking way too long and debating these issues. I think people think, we sit in the back with a smoking jacket, smoking a cigar, trying to figure out the issues of the day. But it really is such an important and public process. Tomorrow, in the Massachusetts State Senate, we're debating a bill that I drafted. I worked with some of my colleagues on for wage transparency to make sure that people are getting equal pay for equal work across Massachusetts. It's an important bill I've been working on for a few years. We got it through the process, and it's scheduled for debate tomorrow. So I leave here tonight, I'll go home, I'll write my remarks, I'll get ready for a debate, and we will stand there in the Senate chamber tomorrow, 40 of us, all representing our own unique districts, and get up and debate the bill. Hopefully at the end of the day, we have the votes to pass it, I think we do, and then we'll send it off to the governor. But that process is online. So tomorrow at 11 a.m., if you go onto that malegislature.gov website, you click on Senate session, you can watch the debate unfold. You can see how your state senator is debating a bill. Every single time we take a vote, I just mentioned Rep. Hawkins was in voting tonight on a bill, very, very controversial firearms bill in Massachusetts that was considered in the House. As I sat down, my staff sent me the roll calls online. So this is how every representative voted on that bill that was considered during 5-6 hours of debate today. That's all public information. Get to know that. Get to know that because, again, elections matter, but more importantly, when you realize that you have the ability to reach out to a state rep, to reach out to a state senator and say, hey, this is important to me for a reason. This is how I feel about an issue. We listen to that. Now, we're not always going to agree. It's just not how things are done. We're not always going to agree. But it empowers us as legislators when we can go in and say, you know what? I heard from this person in my district, and they brought something to me that I think needs to be considered. It happens all the time. It's how government should work. It's not perfect, but again, that's how we operate in the Massachusetts legislature. To be informed, to be engaged, to be accessible, and to be transparent. And I will say that, you know, I'm a big political science nerd myself. When we talk about voter engagement, how important that is, we celebrate. We saw the numbers. We celebrate when we get 30% turnout and we say, oh man, we did good. 30% of the people showed up. 7 out of 10 people had no opinion. How is that happening? Where we have social media that has turned into, you know, the town square where people are debating all day long, and you go to the dumps down the street and everybody wants to yell, and then you look at the elections and you say, oh my God, 7 out of 10 people, 8 out of 10 people had no opinion in this election. That is going to hurt democracy. It has hurt democracy. I can tell you, as somebody who's been a data nerd, political data nerd for since I've been paying attention since I was a kid, whether or not you vote is public information. We all understand that. When you go and vote, whether it's in a primary or a general, I know that you voted. Don't know who you voted for. That's all private, but I know that you voted. I can tell by a little bit of data magic whether you only vote if it's sunny out or if you come out if it rains out. I can tell if you only vote in a presidential election or a municipal election. I can tell if you only vote on Tuesdays or if you like Saturday elections in some towns, right? So what does that mean? That means that when elected officials are actually out running for the job and talking to people about where they stand on issues, who are they going to talk to? They're going to talk to the people that they know are going to vote, right? So that's where we spend our resources. That's where we spend our money. Both of them are limited. So if we have an opportunity to go to talk to people that are going to vote, we're going to do that first. If you are somebody that doesn't vote, probably not going to get a knock on the door from me or my campaign. Now, that's not a judgment. It's not to disparage anybody. But where we need to, again, 180,000 constituents in 7 communities. If I'm going to go out and talk to people, I want to know that you're going to engage, that you're going to be a voter. So the power is not only in just the aggregate and having all your votes, but actually in the personal. Saying, hey, Paul, I vote every single time. We call you a super voter, right? I put a score next to your name. I know that you vote every time. That's somebody I want to talk to about issues. Yeah, we won't always agree. Those are the issues we want to talk about, right? So the elections matter, engagement matters. Again, people pay attention to who's voting. And when we have such large turnouts, and we tend to see those in presidential elections, all of us at the state level and at the municipal level say, my God, could you imagine if we had this last election? Could you imagine if 80% of the people turned out and had an opinion and voted? Now, I don't care if you go into the voting booth and you don't choose anybody. Maybe that's your protest. But show up. I heard the question earlier, can we pass a voting mandate, right? Now, these are discussions that happen all the time. Every couple of years in Massachusetts, people say, what can we do? What can we do? Think about those barriers to voting and look at what we've done in the Massachusetts legislature to remove those barriers. Again, not always easy, many times controversial. I'll tell you as somebody who drafted initial language for mail-in voting, that I got literally people calling my office saying, you are an idiot, you're trying to ruin the system. And I said, all I want to do is just make it easy for people to vote, right? I filed a bill, yes, I'm sorry, one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, let me just, I filed a bill this year, not for a voter mandate, but to basically take election day in November every 2 years. So that'll cover our state and federal elections. Sorry, John, municipal candidates, but maybe we can get there. To make it a holiday, right? Think about the presidents from Massachusetts. I always think of John F. Kennedy. I was a big Kennedy fan. We don't have a holiday that celebrates John F. Kennedy in Massachusetts. So I had somebody from my district, just up the road, who said, I get this great idea, let's make JFK Day a holiday in Massachusetts. I said, I have a better idea. Let's make it on election day, so that people will not have to go into work that double shift, be forced to either figure it out to vote by mail or, worst case scenario, not be able to vote. Making election day a holiday is one of those ideas. Not everybody agrees with me, but it's one of those ideas to promote voter participation. Amanda?
So quick question.
Yes.
And I so thank you for everything you do. And
Yes.
for being here tonight, because I know you worked all day and you're here as well, so we thank you for that. Just pretty much like everybody else, but also to you. So I will say, there are a lot of people who can't vote yet,
Yep.
but they pay taxes and they live in these communities and
Yep.
they have kids in the schools and they're active participants in a lot of things. But they just maybe because of their visa status or where they are, they're not US citizens,
Sure.
they can't vote. Do you answer their calls or
Yeah.
can they call you too, and does their voice matter?
Yeah, so two things on that. Number one, just as a personal matter, I don't care if you've worked for my opponent, if you can't vote, if you don't have status, if you are reaching out to my office, many times if you're not even in my district, I'll figure out a way to help you. But if you reside in my district or have a business in my district, or your kids are in school in my district, you reach out, no questions asked, we do what we can to help. Bill Titus, again, does all of our constituent casework, so he does the initial intake. There is a firewall between voter information and what we do in government. It's not only state law, it's ethics law, and again, it's a personal ethic of mine to make sure that there is no interaction. When you call me, or you send me an email, or you send me a letter, I have no idea if you've ever voted, if you voted. Again, when I talk about the political science piece of it and I'm out knocking doors to get votes, it's a different story. But for government, for what I'm there and I'm elected to do, there is a firewall, there's separation. You call and reach out, I'm gonna try and help you out.
Thank you.
Question, yeah?
You said every bill is discussed by the whole Senate?
No, every bill gets a public hearing. So the way it's broken down is there are a series of joint committees. Those joint committees have jurisdiction over a certain topic. So there's a joint committee on education. So every bill that deals with K-12 education goes to that committee. Like I said, I do financial services. There's a committee on transportation that handles all the public transportation, roads, bridges. The bill will get filed, and then the clerk will send that to its initial committee. That committee is bound to have a hearing, a public hearing for every bill. That public hearing consists of a hearing room like this. The committee members will sit at the dais. The bill will come up, members of the public can come in and speak on any bill. Once the committee then decides the next step for that bill, that's when it could end up on the floor of the Senate or the House. So you think about those 7,000 bills.
How many ended up on the floor?
So,
Up to 7,000?
yeah, so not many.
No.
You're talking a couple hundred,
That makes more sense.
you're talking a couple hundred. And even with that, there's a lot of local bills, right? There's bills that are not controversial. Name a bridge after a veteran. We do sick leave banks where public employees can take advantage of benefits if they have cancer or something like that. There are a few major pieces that go through. I think we've been pretty busy in the Senate this year where we're starting to pass, or at least consider and debate a lot more legislation. So just to kind of back up on that, we're in the midst of a 2-year session. Massachusetts legislature sits for 2 years. First day of the session started in January of this year, and it doesn't end until August 1st or July 31st at midnight of next year, of the second year. So the timeline's in place. Every one of those bills, those 7,000 bills that have been filed already, has to come out of its committee of jurisdiction, so the committee that deals with that, by the first week in February. That gives us time to then kind of sort through all those bills that came out of committee and see, what we're going to debate. Other questions? Yeah?
Did you say there were 3 things you did?
So, absolutely, sorry. Keeping me accountable. I love it. And that, by the way, that clock I think is like 5 minutes ahead. So it's loud but wrong, like politics many times. So, constituent services, right? Dealing with those issues that come from people that need help for something. The second piece is the legislation that comes to us that we debate on the floor, right? And then there it is. And then the third piece that I think is critically important, that not everybody kind of has their own unique way of doing things. The third piece for me is going out, doing things like this, engaging with people, and actually promoting participation in the process. That is something that I think as an elected official is incumbent upon me. And I'll tell you for two reasons. Number one, we talked about electoral politics, elections. Well, I think if 15% of the people showing up to vote, 30% of the people showing up to vote, and we're like, wow, that's a ton, that's great. I think part of the problem is that the candidates aren't doing their job. That people that are running for office aren't actually going out and engaging people to excite you, right? If you look and you're like, oh my God, I get 3 choices and I hate every one of them, you're not gonna go show up and vote. But if I can motivate people and I can get out and engage people and say, these are the issues at stake the way I see it, join with me or don't, but let's have the conversation, let's vote. That's important. And the final piece to that in engaging people, it's the reason why we do office hours in every community on a regular basis. It's the reason why I do them on Zoom now. It's the reason why I do them at night so day shift workers can get there. It's the reason why I do them on the weekends so night shift workers can get there, right? It's important for me to have an idea of where people in my district land on certain issues. There are things that come up that are very controversial, that there is a lot of noise about. This firearms bill that the House is doing today, I'll give you a perfect example. This bill initiated in the House. There was some maneuvering that, they kept it in their standing committee, which is fine. It's all part of the process. But we weren't involved in that in the Senate. Now, we're doing our own piece that I think will come out at some point during the session. But I'm getting hundreds of calls from people that say, I demand you vote no, or I demand you vote yes. Bill, you took calls yesterday and today at the office, right? And they'll say, I need the senator to vote no on this bill. Okay, well, it's a House bill. I don't care, I still want him to vote no. That's a failure on my part. If I can't have that conversation with a constituent to say, hey, thanks for calling, appreciate it, need your views, but just so you know, here's the process, right? To empower people to be a part of it. So that when it does come to the Senate, or we do have our own bill, that I'm that much more informed and empowered by the people that elected me.
That's great. Well, we are almost at time, and I want to be mindful. I know we have kiddos here who probably need to go to bed too. But I want to say thank you so much. Thanks for letting us
Thank
get
you.
these case studies. I know you had to wait.
Yeah, no, it was
while,
awesome.
and I
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it.
It's so great to have you here. I am sure that the senator wouldn't mind taking a few more questions after we end, if anyone has any. I'm sure Miranda would do the same if anyone had questions for her. But also, if you have any questions for people in general, or you just don't know what to do next with a thought you're having or a problem you're having, call the Literacy Center. I know that we might not have all the answers, but we have such smart people that work and volunteer for us that we can usually help you find the answer. So we do a lot more than just teach classes at the Literacy Center. We aim to be a community resource for all, and we hope to be able to continue to get better with you. So please call us, go to our website, theliteracycenter.com. All of our contact information is on there, and I'm also always available to you. I want to thank you again for being here tonight. Showing up to this kind of event is the first step in engagement. I'm proud to be a part of this community. I'm excited for all of us to now go out and share this information with the people in our lives. And do let us know if we can do anything for you. But until next time, stay well, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event.
All right.
Thank you so much again for coming. I so appreciate you.
It's awesome. Thanks for doing this. Yeah, that was awesome.